share? Okay. Why? Okay. This is the thing you want to avoid, and it worked fine. Oh, that's because it's not. Okay. Well, is this visible?
Yes.
Okay. So patterns, pattern languages, and wicked problems. Okay, so I've got all this stuff. Okay. It's okay. Everything is now all over the screen. Okay, so I remember what I'm saying here. So the central hypothesis of what I'm wanting to say is that I believe that the patterns and pattern languages can play a useful role in addressing wicked problems. They seem to have a lot of the right features, but sort of making the pieces fit together isn't trivial. And so thinking about how to sort of make it easier and to involve other people in the process is maybe trickier still, but it's sort of critical to the success. So in terms of reaching that goal, I think for today, talk about what we mean by patterns, pattern languages, and wicked problems. How are they characterized? Why do we think that patterns and pattern languages do make good candidates for this sort of problem? And we need to think about ways that these processes can be enacted so people can use them more easily, but also how they would be evaluated, and to try to figure out ways to actually help in the process of making all of this easier to use and more effective. And so actually flipping down to the very last item here, the goal is really, I am interested in helping to improve our collective efficacy and our civic intelligence. So it's the thing that I sort of care about, I'll say the most, is how well we can work together. Because if we can't do that, then we're in big trouble. So wicked problems, what is a wicked problem? So the origin of this term is in 1973, Horst Rittel and Martin Weber came up with this concept of wicked problems. And they were basically saying that there exists this class of problems that really aren't solvable in the standard sense. It's not like solving an equation. It's not like fixing a tire on your bicycle. It's not that you fix it and it's fixed forever, or that people aren't trying to get in the way of you fixing it. And so it was never supposed to convince people that there's no hope. That wasn't the idea. And I have the little graph here on the right. It was based on this Ngram from Google, instances of its use. And so the term is beginning to be in very widespread use. And I was going to have a slide of all these things, but it's involved in every place, and which to me is kind of a hopeful sign, because it means that it is working in an interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary way. So I don't think this is worth really going into it at length. And the slides that I think that I could breeze through more quickly are, I have an asterisk at the bottom right there, but this is something that a lot of people obsess about, I would say. And these are the 10 original characteristics of wicked problems. And I agree with them significantly. but I don't consider them the received truth. And because there are more characteristics and there are less, and I don't agree with, like, for example, the ones I haven't read are the ones that I don't really agree with that much. Every wicked problem is essentially unique. If every wicked problem was unique, we wouldn't be able to make any progress on any of them if we can't build. So this is, kind of for another day on that. But these are their original 10 characteristics, which I think are quite important and good. Here's just some idea, and these happen sort of at all levels, from the planetary to the local. And I think, we're faced with the same things that we've been faced with for a long time. Environmental degradation, water scarcity, authoritarianism, oppression, pandemics, war, violence, all these nasty things that we've got, we probably will still have in 100 years. We'll probably have 1,000 years if we're around. But that does not mean that we can't think about these and try to lessen the impacts of them at the very least. And unfortunately, each of these storms encourages the others. And it's quite possible that we're at this era where we have multiple storms happening at the same time. And it raises the question of, who is supposed to be addressing these issues? Is it the market? Is that going to solve everything? Facebook and the oil companies? Or is it thoughtful and informed governmental leaders? That's, a lot of people might not think that's even a possibility. Is it academia, the media, science, technology, AI, luck, divine intervention, hope? Bill Gates, maybe? He didn't have enough money. So this is one of these asterisks, one that we don't have to dwell on, but people have already come up with this idea of super wicked problems. And I said, well, why stop there? And I've defined ultra super wicked problems and hyper ultra super wicked problems, which I think they're sort of tongue in cheek, but they exist. I mean, if we're going to open our eyes. So there's a lot of issues about the concept itself. Some people say, no, I don't like it. Let's change it. And, I think that the train's left the station. We are using that term. It's going to be somewhat ambiguous, I believe. It's like kind of one of these things you when you see it, you know it. And so researchers and practitioners are using it all the time. And so it's just those very, very thorny, hard to define problems that we have in mass numbers. So what's a pattern? How does a pattern, what is one, and how does it factor into these issues? So just tiny bit of history. The original source of this came from architecture. There's a book called A Pattern Language. It's written by Christopher Alexander with several colleagues. And it was trying to, they were mostly architects, urban planners. They were trying to, they believed that sort of architecture had gone awry. It wasn't meeting people's requirements. It wasn't doing the things that buildings ought to be doing. So they were looking around and they saw things that they thought really did work, did make you want to live there. They supported vitality, etc. And so they sort of distilled the essence of what they thought were these exemplary characteristics into what they called patterns. And the book has, it has 253 patterns. But first, I guess, the way I think of a pattern is a type of a seed. And it's a seed that different groups of people can use in different ways with different expectations that will produce different types of results. There's still some sort of, it's not precise, but it's not totally without meaning either. It's kind of mid-range. And there is this concept that I am quite interested in, called it mid-range theories. And maybe a pattern is like that. But patterns aren't recipes. They don't say, do this, do this, do this, or this, and then you'll have a cake. It says, oh, it's nice to have a cake. It's nice to have something to celebrate ritual occasions or something. Might be a pattern. And so they're called patterns because they appear over and over again. And just, I have two illustrated ones from my book, The Liberating Voices Pattern Language. And we got this frog, and it's Earth's vital signs is one of our patterns. And then the one on the left is for techno-criticism, which of course is central to computers and society. So one of the patterns is an activist road trip. And we were reading the book in my class at Evergreen, and the student said, we have to go on an activist road trip. And everybody agreed. So at that point on, every year we did an activist road trip, which students organized. And these are some photographs from that. When I was teaching in China, I asked my students if they wanted to go on an activist road trip. And they said yes. So we got on the train and we went to the innovation hub in Shanghai, and we worked with these patterns. And the patterns in my book, there are cards, and so we have the cards. If you look at closely, they're looking at the patterns on the cards, and we have the patterns in Chinese as well as English. So some of the people are Chinese speakers that are using those cards, and the cards, the patterns are intended to be used with other patterns, and that's where the idea of the language comes along. And this is a little Kumo map showing a little segment of how the patterns in our collection are connected, linked to each other. So a pattern language is an ordered collection of patterns. It's a patterns that the people who put the pattern language together believe work together. They belong together. They form a whole. And in Alexander's original book, a pattern language book, it says a pattern language can be developed in any domain. And so that's what really sort of got this movement launched, was this idea that, a pattern language can be developed in any domain. So a pattern language is about architecture and human settlements. The Liberating Voices book that I put together was about engagement using information and communication. And so here's just two patterns out of Alexander's book, Staircase as Stage. This for some reason really resonates to me. I grew up in Los Angeles. Nobody had stairs. I walked into a place with stairs. And I went, oh my God, I want to run up and down this. Anyway, I could go on actually. Then identifiable neighborhood is another thing. Alexander and his colleagues believed you don't want everything to be uniform in a city. We need to have these identifiable neighborhoods. And so after Alexander's book came lots of books, really hit hold in sort of the computer interaction community, and maybe half of these languages that people have now developed are in that realm, sort of technological or socio-technological area. People say that the iPhone did develop a pattern language that they use for their apps and everything. And I have not really seen that independently verified, but that's what everybody says. And then about half have to do with some sort of kind of a social change, transition towns, refugee settlements, tsunami, emergency communication systems, etc. So there's a history, but this is the book that I helped put together, and I've been kind of working with it ever since. It has 136 patterns, and it was developed by over 80 people. And we have civic intelligence as the first one, which is maybe the broadest. And then the last one is retreat and reflection, talking about the importance of not acting. And they're characterized and in kind of an order. And on the cover, I've marked this top one was sense of struggle. And at the bottom, this is activist road trip, but an activist road trip can be somewhat frivolous in looks, but very important. And then some can be very serious. Freedom Summer in the States, where the activists went down to the South and worked and were registering voters and et cetera. So I don't have any kind of clock in front of me, and I'm always worried about this. Anyway, so kind of getting to the place where these connect up, the idea of a wicked problem and the patterns, the pattern languages. Here's from a book called New Strategies for Wicked Problems. And basically to sort of sum up, they say more effectiveness, accountability, and democracy are what's needed. For all of these wicked problems, they are sort of making some statements about what are needed in a general way. And they're not saying, you know, how to do the measurement, the effectiveness measurement exactly, what type of democracy, et cetera. The next bullet down is new problem solving methodologies, processes, institutions, et cetera, to integrate science in the technological sort of a technocratic sort of knowledge and other sorts of knowledges and values possessed by diverse stakeholders. Those are also needed. They need to integrate different types of research activities. People in power won't solve these. Now I'm going off their script. These are, I guess, my conclusions, even though I've drawn from all sorts of different places. And then the last one I think is critical. Civil society is unorganized and spread out. There needs to be some slight better organization. Herding cats is hard. So we need loose and tight. We need different types of coordination so that people's small efforts can be leveraged and be part of a larger effort. And so a pattern and pattern languages, just to talk a little bit about why these might help with the wicked problems, is they're a collection of patterns, and they're not saying, oh, this is how you solve the problem with this, because it doesn't work out. Oopsie. And there you go. And then patterns capture these key ideas, but they don't tell you exactly what to do. So one pattern in one community would be enacted in a different way than a pattern in another community. Also, it kind of provides a little lingua franca in which all the parties can agree that in principle they like the pattern, they think it's a good one, but it's not owned by any one community. They're supposed to be adaptable, they're repeatable but malleable. Patterns can help people evolve answers together, this kind of mutual adaptation concept, this Lindblom. There's not necessarily central command or hierarchies. And so these are some of the reasons I think that they could be useful. Now, this is a kind of a concrete example of one way that a pattern language was used, and we wouldn't have thought of it, or I wouldn't have, at least, I'll admit, I wouldn't have thought about really using one in this way. But the University of Oregon in the 70s said, we need a master plan for our campus. And that means, how do you consider and build and develop new buildings for the campus? And so they came up with a pattern language. They said, we'll use a pattern language as our master plan. And so this illustrates all of the patterns that they use, but it also they use the pattern language for a specific purpose, which was the master plan. Okay, so anyway, these are the patterns. this also illustrates some of the ways that people have used patterns that I think if you were going to support this with software in some way, you would want to incorporate this sort of thing, because this is how a pattern language was actually kind of marked up for use over a long period of time for projects of pretty large significance. And so what they've done is they took a lot of patterns from Alexander's book, like promenade, local transport area, looped local roads. So a lot of they've grouped it according to the way that works for them. They've put in patterns of Alexander's, and then they've added their own patterns to put this together. So that's where their big set of patterns is. Then they've marked them. The highlighted ones are the ones that must be considered for every project. You have to look at that pattern for any project you do. You have to give it the due diligence and then check it off. And so they don't even use all of these for everything. Not that we're going to go through this. Oh, I should have put an asterisk on this maybe, but I was trying to come up with something similar for the Green New Deal. And so the first group is patterns from the Liberating Voices collection. The next one is ones that I just pulled out of a lot of the reading I had done on looking at the original legislation in the US, but also a few books and articles, and came up with this big group. And this is not a pattern language per se. It's kind of the what would you call it, the DNA or the germs or something of a larger effort if one wanted to get build that out. So the pattern sphere, just to finish it up, but I do wish I had the time anyway.
Doug, it's 10:37.
10:30. Okay, so 30 plus 10. Okay, so how about like 3 minutes? And so these are some of the ideas that we have for the for building out some software support for this. Because one thing is people are developing these patterns, and they're not being shared in any sort of uniform way. You can't sort of find them all in one place. They're all over the place. Some are just in books. Some are in books with little fragments laying around. And so these are some of the things that I think would belong in the pattern sphere software we're talking about that Scott and I have been working on. And so I think I just showed some examples of what we've done, but we're trying to sort of put together some sort of a focus for the pattern work. So we've had these workshops, and people will come together and they'll say, oh, I think this pattern looks interesting. I think that pattern looks interesting. And so then if people individually come up with patterns that they think are interesting, then they get together and talk about how they could all be used together. And so this is sort of the analogy. There was a class at Evergreen, permaculture design, and so we put this together. If I turn off the mute, so we put this together so people can go through a team, like say 20 people could all indicate what they thought about these different patterns. Say, yeah, I think the good life would probably be something I would like. So then when you roll up all these things, you could come up with something like, oh, people really liked the power of story. And so we're trying to think of one way where you can kind of get a group consensus or a group take on what they're thinking in regards to a certain sort of issue. So that's one thing. Another thing that we've done with the patterns is we have this questionnaire. It's called the activist game. The activist mirror, and it asks you 8 questions, and then at the end it tells you what type of activist you are. According to this one theory, there's 4 sort of types of activists, and they're not even all traditional activists. They're people that are assisting. And so we have this in English and Italian, and now Spanish, even though it's not slide here. And it goes through and you answer these 8 questions, and then it says that here's your here's what type of pattern you are. It reveals you to be a rebel. Like maybe 10% of us are rebels. I don't really know the numbers. And then it comes up with 4 patterns that the game, or we, think that you might be interested: experimental school, public agenda, spiritually grounded activism, and the big tent for social change. If you think about it, this could be sort of a search engine for patterns. Find out which ones you might be interested in. This is, I was in a pattern language conference, and these people were putting a refugee pattern language. And so I was just looking and see what aspects of their pattern language would be supported by the way we're thinking about going to the next step with pattern languages. And these things are reflected in the big paper that Aldo and I are working on, which is, when I say big paper, it's like now 70 pages or so. So it's like, who wants that? Okay, so I guess want to end this and talk about this, but the question is, how do you sort of pull a community together? The parts are there. How is this? How would we do it? This idea that really, if there's any time where the world sort of needs this kind of connection of people, whether it's done with patterns or something else, I would say it's now. If you've looked at a newspaper in the last 5 minutes or so, or a year, and so I don't want to, as usual, okay, so this is kind of a status. A lot of things are have been written. We're working on the software, trying to do a little outreach to other communities and see what they think about using the patterns, trying to sort of scare up new patterns and put them in in the repository. And so the era of wicked problems, we need to be thinking about how to support the people that are working on these. And I guess I'm proposing, saying that the patterns and pattern thinking can be useful in kind of summarizing and kind of trying to make sense out of the problems that we have. So free the patterns, and thanks. So that's what I've got. I'm trying to stop the share. That do it? Nope, that's not it. Okay, so this is where it doesn't want me to. Scott, can you stop the share? It doesn't, there's not taking my input.
I don't know how to do it for you. No.
Okay.
I'm looking into it.
Oh, that might be somehow. Okay. So I stopped that. Okay. Not a problem. Okay. So, people that were, unless somebody's got something burning, and maybe I'll just say, or ask, did the description and talk about wicked problems, was that useful? Is that kind of fit your notion of what a wicked problem was, or? Or had you heard of them and were wondering, or did you have some sort of idea in your mind of what one was for the people that had been exposed to that before?
Doug, maybe I can start this off. Thanks for the presentation. It's amazing how every time you manage to get me excited again, even though we've been through this so many times already. So I think that's really good. Your super mega gazillion wicked whatever super duper wicked problems that actually shows that the messiness, the uber complexity, that's the nature of the beast, as it were. And I think you also showed there's many different types of pattern languages and sources for pattern languages that you kind of need all of them at the same time to address a really super duper wicked problem. So how do you see, what are some principles for the bricolage of different pattern languages? What are their intersections? How does that work? Because they're all self-contained universes in a way, but are there kind of conceptual bridges between them?
Yeah, now that's, to me, well, the first thing is that I do think that people have kind of looked at a pattern language as kind of an autonomous entity, when that's not the way things really work. I mean, if you have one book that you really like, does that mean that you don't use any concepts from any other books? And so it's, I do really admire the idea, appreciate the idea of packaging patterns within a pattern language. But when it gets right down to it, no one's used all of them at one time. You're always picking and choosing, you're always prioritizing. And Alexander and everybody else says you have to customize and adapt for your conditions on, situation on the ground. And so there's always been, users will always bring in patterns from other places. So to me, it's kind of almost a given that you do want to support the picking patterns from different places. But I don't have the answer at all of how this stuff comes together. And one of the things that I'm kind of counting on is this kind of grounded theory of that once we start getting new patterns engaged, and I just want to start importing them into the system when it's ready, so we can sort of start thinking about how this kind of works, because really we're in this disciplinary, I'll say, trap where people are kind of trying to draw circles around parts of problems, and it just doesn't really work that way. I mean, why have we divided and conquered? Because you can divide and conquer and it works in this local sense, but it's always going to be this bigger picture involved. And so I get a Google alert every day with all the new papers that have mentioned wicked problems, and I can't believe there's disciplines I never knew existed, and there's talking and people whose point of view I wouldn't really appreciate at all. So but I think we just have to start really doing it, and I'm hope, I don't want to say that, it's not guaranteed, and I don't want to just sort of punt, but we're talking about how you sort of, how would I take all the books in my room and shred them up and put them all in one vat and come up. I think part of it would emerge out of use. I think that one of our things is called the power of story. I think the power of story could probably be used in just about any situation. And so I think if we had some sort of maybe a system where when something was used, it might get more points, or you might have discussions about different ones, or I use this pattern in this situation, because also when they've been these distinct entities out there, when individuals use them and say, oh, I figured out a great way to use this, how that knowledge never came to this other community. And so you want the lessons learned from one group to really percolate over into the other. And if there's a sort of a natural way to do it via software or somehow, yeah.
But ultimately, these patterns you're talking about are really about sparking creativity among human users. It's not like software patterns that are meant to be used by, for example, ontology engineers or algorithms or whatever. It's really about triggering the imagination, getting people to talk together, to collectively interpret. Is that correct? That's the kind of patterns you're most interested in?
I'm interested in kind of all the above, because the pattern language that generates the University of Oregon campus is it's kind of a conceptual, it is a pattern language, but it's got tangible outcomes. I'm interested in that. The patterns in ours are at a sort of a higher level, but you could use the patterns in my book. I say my, but it's 80 authors too. Our book, that to generate a new organization, or to do a new curriculum, or to I believe that you can really, there's manifold uses of them. And so I don't say it's just to sort of spark an idea. I mean, the activist road trip, we go on an activist road trip. And so, we did for, 10 years, last 10 years of my teaching. And the students, one group, they were doing like a Google map thing and showing our route, and they could have wrote a book or a white paper or something on how to do your own activist road trip. So I think I sort of pivoted out of the question you precisely asked, but any other, anybody want to pick up on any of that? Was the whole concept like brand new to people, or had they ever? Chuck.
I will ask a question, Doug, and this might be going along with. Let's see, who was there's someone else who was on the call about this, but I guess thinking about having students in a say an undergraduate college setting wrestle with wicked problems within those very narrow delimiters of a term, and this is one course that they'd be taking among many others, and so their attention, of course, is divided. I was just wondering about your experiences having students engage with wicked problems in that kind of context. Tips for us educators who have the very strict limits, and I would love my students to spend all of their time working on my class, but I know that they don't.
Well, I wonder, it seems like, I mean, this is like a meta answer, but it seems like a pattern language for exposing students to wicked problems, might be a good thing. But and then I also think that say if we had something like that, having students, one thing that I've really noticed is if any group is getting together and they're using the cards, the patterns, I usually have a bunch of the things hanging around I could show you, but anyway, we have cards of these things too, and sitting around and kind of, they're useful prompts for getting students to be, for getting anybody to be looking at the issues sort of more deeply, but also to build on each other's ideas more than just, I have an independent thought here, I have an independent thought there, and they kind of do work that way to sort of unlock. And so I think I'd like to sort of follow up and see, because Chuck, you mentioned that, I mean, several people mentioned in the introductions that they would sort of like something like that. And I mean, I do think that the fundamental problem is the world is gigantic, and we're all kind of concerned about it, but how do you come to terms with it? And acknowledging that it's much more complicated than we will ever know, but we still want to get some kind of grasp on it. And so, I'm always suspicious of somebody who thinks they know it all. You go, well, you don't, I got news for you. You don't know it all. You might know something. And so it's kind of a war. You want to entertain and encourage uncertainty, but
it seems like
be careful what you wish for too, I guess.
Yeah, right. Just to follow, the card activity, and it'd be interesting in hearing some more details on what you do there. But in some sense, I suppose it could give students the experience of kind of work. It's always nice for students to kind of work within constraints to a certain extent. But it offers the experience of, I guess, of trying to capture a wicked problem using this set of cards that are all kind of, they are what they are, and then rubbing up against the ways in which boy, I wish I had another card or something, right? So they get that challenge of trying to fit within existing patterns, and then having this moment with, okay, well, maybe I'll let them make a new card at that point, right? And create a pattern of their own.
Yeah, no, we had I often in the old days would give them blank cards too, and at first exposure, people weren't coming up with new things, or at least not in my experience. But I do think that sort of if you keep doing these things, over the semester, that they will start thinking in patterns more as they go on. And I mean, one time in class, a student said, "Wait, my favorite pattern is blah blah blah. What's yours?" And everybody popped up with their favorite pattern, and I thought that was great. Any Any thoughts from anybody else or questions? Or, I mean, this is the first time we've done this. I really appreciate that you showed up to listen, and I'm curious. Well, any Marluth?
I have a question. It's really like if I would want to work with pattern languages with a group of students or a community, how do you prevent, like you've done a lot of shops and in developing these, how do you prevent sort of people being overwhelmed by the amount of patterns, or not grasping the pattern just by the picture and the keywords? Like it seems so vast, especially if you think in terms of wicked problems such as climate change. It seems like that could be just a practical concern.
Yeah, no, that's a huge concern, and it came up like immediately, because I would hand them the deck of 100 of ours has 136 patterns in it, and so it was always a challenge, especially if it's just brand new to them. And so, often we would sort of, well, I would get, say, 6 people in a group for a workshop, and then divide it into 6. And so then they have a smaller ones. They would just sort of start by throwing out the ones that they didn't think were that useful, and which is kind of the thing we were trying to do in the software too. But you need to get it down to a manageable size somehow. Sometimes I would just, like say it was permaculture, I would pick up, ones that I thought were specific to that, and they would only work with those, even though it's interesting because the way the mind works, at least with some people, is you can get something that you think is completely irrelevant, and they'll say, no, that fits perfectly. But also we did come up with this set of 40 cards that were kind of sort of loosely based on, I would call them maybe the most popular: power of story, opportunity spaces, meaningful maps. I forget what they are, but I got it written down. But so I mean, you have to pare it down, and that's one of the issues that we would have with the software idea too, because we can only entertain a certain amount of stuff at one time in our minds, and so yeah, getting it down. Yeah. I'd like to, anybody have a question or a thought or I'd certainly be, Doreen.
I was thinking that this might be a good way to get students to recognize that a single subject can't solve all the problems. So I think there's a slight risk, particularly in a subject like computer science. When we teach students, we kind of trying to sell it as, here's the solution to a lot of things. It can do an awful lot of things for you. But if you have this space of patterns and give students a wicked problem and say, maybe I don't know that you can organize them in terms of subjects or domains or areas, but that you need to have things from different domains coming together. Even if you don't have a definite structure for the solution, you at least need to have some wild cards or spaces left open where we need information and knowledge from other domains to solve this. I think that would be quite an interesting thing to try.
Yeah, that's another sort of built-in conflict with, I'll say, our focus on the computers.
Yeah.
you can do anything you want, but computers have to be part of it. And yeah, no, and that's, yeah. And I don't know, back to that stupid slide I have on who's supposed to be doing this work. And really, I guess everybody needs to be doing part of it. And I do think that we have a kind of a special responsibility. We loosed the stuff on the world. I mean, I didn't do it all personally, but I don't know. Climate change and it seems quite different than designing, an algorithm. But I'm wondering, as a computers and society SIG, is there a pattern language for analyzing and critiquing computer use? Because it seems like the problems that are sort of, I would say, computer assisted problems seem to be way outpacing our sort of ability to regulate them or stop them, or we're running and they're in a train and they're lobbying. I mean, the five, going off script here, the five biggest lobbyists in the US are the five biggest computer companies. And so they're buying and selling senators and whatever and trying. They don't always succeed, but yeah, so we've got our hands full, I guess. And so one of the things I do think is kind of an intellectual chore is kind of bringing the conversation back, because the person on the street, the people in the elementary school, the computer scientists, there has to be some sort of a connection, and it's not just coding. I mean, yeah. So I'm certainly I'm up to talking about this stuff like forever, and so I encourage anybody that's here to get in touch with me if we want to keep going. I'm interested in also at some point, in one way or another, trying to be thinking about what we're going to be doing for this monthly chit chat, the works in progress. I like the idea. We just sort of decided just to start doing it and see how it goes, because I was got this new post of being the chair, and I looked at the list of people. I knew a few, but there we were, and we didn't. We haven't been doing things, I guess, as a SIG before. So I think maybe we should just call it a day. I know that people are super busy, so I appreciate people showing up, and I'm seeing people are leaving because they've got to go. But how's that sound? Any closing thoughts? Okay, I'm seeing. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks,
Okay.
Doug. It was great. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.